What's cracking, people? Another topic here, and this time it's about the wonderful Nintendo 64. I was going to single out various games from the Nintendo 64 and create individual videos on them in regards to this topic I'm going to discuss, but I decided just to pick two of them and put them in the same video, which should hopefully still convey my points. Now, no matter what people say about the Nintendo 64 controller, that thing was integral to the console, the experience, and more importantly, how the fantastic software was built with it in mind. Personally, it's my favourite controller ever, just slightly edging out the GameCube controller, but I'm not here to talk about how much I love those controllers. I'm here to talk about one aspect of it, and that is the industry-changing analog stick. We all know the history and influence, and we could do the age-old argument of how Nintendo changed things up and where would the industry be without them, etc, etc. But I'm not here to talk about that side of things. I'm here to talk about how using that controller, namely the analog stick, in conjunction with the software, made you feel like you were truly controlling that in-game character instead of just controlling it. Now, let me explain. We all know that when Nintendo creates hardware, they generally have software in mind to take full advantage of the hardware's unique capabilities, or even at times the hardware ideas come about when they want to create a certain game, but their current hardware can't fully realize it. Super Mario 64 and the Nintendo 64 was the situation where neither could exist without the other, and in the middle you had the analog stick. This controller, that was not only designed as a way to move Mario around in a 3D space, but Nintendo wanted you to actually feel like you were Mario, down to every tiny little bit of input, and not simply by just moving him forwards or backwards, just pushing the stick and moving him forwards and backwards, but to actually feel like you were that character and you had complete control over him. This, I feel, was down to two major factors. One was the animation given to Mario, and two was the feel of the analog stick itself. Now, Mario had in this game a large number of movements, all depending on how far you moved the controls, the analog stick, in the direction that you wanted him to go in. And it wasn't just his animations, it was also the speed of those animations. If you wanted him to, say, sneak up on something, you'd simply push the analog stick forwards just a fraction, and he would start tiptoeing towards them. But that wasn't all. The speed on which he tiptoed also depended on how far you had moved that analog stick. So you could actually tiptoe at a snail's pace, push it forward a bit more, and he'd start tiptoeing a bit faster, but he'd still be going, quite extremely slow. To push it forward a tiny bit more, and he'd still be tiptoeing, but slightly faster, but still, slowly at the same time. Now, naturally, if you move the analog stick too far, his new sets of animation would take over, which at this point would be his general walking animation. And once again, the speed in which he walked also depended on how far you have pushed the stick. And eventually, the same thing would happen for his running animations. The range of movements, both subtle and blatant, for such an early title were, in my mind, staggering. They were absolutely mind-blowing, but also extremely fundamental to the feel of the character through the use of the analog stick. It wasn't also about Mario's animation. The N64's analog stick, compared to controllers today, in my opinion, just felt more solid in your thumb, like it wanted to let you know that it was there, almost, that its part of the game, and if you were going to use it, you'd have to think about it, because it would affect the game in more ways that you would naturally believe. It had, it had a certain level of resistance to it that made all the difference when you tried to make those subtle movements. I mean, you also have to remember that this was the first analog stick on home consoles, and Nintendo nailed it in my opinion. And this is because they built the software around it, or both the hardware and the software were built together. I'll also give a shout out to the Sega Saturn's 3D controller that was also designed with Nights into Dreams in mind. That controller and that game were built together. But unfortunately, that controller, although similar, was just nowhere near as good. Since then, I've never felt this in any of Mario's later 3D titles. Mario Sunshine is probably the closest, which had its own lovely set of movement variations, but even then, it just wasn't the same as Mario 64. And then you move up to, and then we have the Mario Galaxy games, which control fine, but don't have those same controls at all. It's, especially when it comes to, for example, making Mario run around in a circle. It's almost like the analog stick isn't representing the movements you're making in the game at all. And this was awesome, by the way, in Mario 64, as if you rotated the analog stick in a circle, too fast, Mario would skid to a stop and start running the other way. But if you rotated that stick, fully at Mario's speed on the screen, then it felt like you were truly in control of him again. In Mario Sunshine, Mario literally runs in the smallest circle ever and at insane speeds, which just doesn't feel as organic as it done in Mario 64. Also, it's clear why Nintendo done this in Sunshine, because afterwards they gave Mario a cool spinning jump move that could also be used with Flood, the water device, on his back. But either way, these movements in both Mario 64 and Sunshine, and especially 64, I'm concentrated on that, were just pure fun. And then we have Super Mario 3D World on the Wii U, which almost completely ditches analog controls altogether and uses an 8-directional input that has barely any additional movement animations. I lament the loss of the movement and control that Mario first showed off in Mario 64, and I have no idea why Nintendo hasn't gone back to it and continued using it. And that applies to the vast majority of games today. It no longer feels like I'm controlling my character, or in this case, I'm controlling Mario. That I'm him in the game. It just through the use of the controller, it just doesn't feel like I'm moving him forwards without being connected to him through the controller input. And I just wonder, why are we going backwards? I just don't get it. Like I said, the movement in Mario 64 is absolutely sublime, and I miss it. Anyway, moving on. Another title I want to use as an example is another launch title for the system, and that's Wave Race 64. And I have never controlled a jet ski in a video game like it since. And I'm laughing, but it's true. This game, for me, is racing bliss, and it's all because of the wonderful, tight, subtle controls that the N64 controller offers you, and the wonderful animation and movement that the character has on screen with those controls in mind. Also, more importantly, it's how the characters interact with the environment, which in this case are the random waves that generate around the various tracks. I used to remember trying to ride on top of those waves. As you hit the crescent, I would gently push the analog stick forwards, utterly convinced that it was gaining me more speed, but more importantly, it felt absolutely fantastic. This wasn't a slow game either. and neither was Mario 64 in its own way. I find it amazing how you feel like you have so much subtle control over these characters. You know, how you feel every single movement, even when you're going at speed. And there's loads of other games on the N64 that once again take advantage of this. And Wave Race Blue Storm on the GameCube I absolutely loved, and in many ways it offered more than what Wave Race 64 did. But overall, Wave Race 64 just had that Nintendo EAD magic, as well as that amazing control that Blue Storm just couldn't touch. Once again, Nintendo not only wanted you to feel like you were this character, as well as making you feel like you were controlling a jet ski, but they wanted you to also feel every single wave, not just a few of them, as you're going around the track, as if you would, it would become normal, but they wanted you to feel like you felt every single wave, and they succeeded, and then some. Now, the reason why this discussion came up in my mind is because I bought copies of both Mario 64 and Wave Race 64 on the Wii U Virtual Console, even though I own both of these games physically on my Nintendo 64, stupid Virtual Console. I hate you! And as I tried to play them, I immediately noticed that the controls were just not the same. Now, you could argue that it could be the way that the ports have been done. Emulations have been done, but to my knowledge, these ports are pretty much spot on in all aspects, compared to their originals. But the analog sticks on the Wii U gamepad, which, in themselves are fine, just do not have the same feel or resistance to them as the N64 analog stick has, once again, in my humble opinion. So when I'm playing Mario 64 and Wave Race on the Wii U, all those subtle movements I tried to pull off that I was once be able to do on the original hardware, they just get lost, and it completely puts me off playing those versions of the games. Now, for me, analog sticks have never been the same, or have for the most part not been used the same since the Nintendo 64. We went from using the full input of the control stick in conjunction with the character's animation to using only a portion of it. This is also based on, like I said, the way that the character is designed to move, which for me makes all the difference and has, for the most part, been forgotten. So anyway, before I waffle on anymore, what do you think? Do I have my nostalgic goggles on in terms of that controller? I'd argue no, because I've recently played both versions of these games again, and the evidence, is pretty clear to me. But perhaps you have other thoughts as to why I might be thinking that they just don't feel the same. As always, thanks for watching, and I look forward to your comments. Peace!